Welcome everyone. Thank you for signing in to our webinar today on attracting top female talent and reducing your gender pay gap. We have my esteemed colleague Kamini Chanrai, who's the Gender Research and Policy Manager for Business and Community, and myself, who's the Business Engagement Manager for Government Equalities. A little bit of housekeeping, first of all. I guess what we cover today in the webinar is we're going to look at the whole spectrum of the recruitment process, from job design through to job acceptance, and also setting targets and look at where you can make some changes to improve your gender balance and attract more female candidates for your job roles. As you'll be aware, if you've attended previous webinars, everyone is muted as we have a lot of people online today. We do have an awful lot to cover in today's session. I think we're probably running right up to the time. If we do have time at the end, we'll try and answer a couple of questions. But please do send your questions in. I am aware that we still need to answer some of the questions from the last webinar also, but we will do that shortly over the next few days. So without further ado, let me pass you over to Kamini.
Hi everyone, and thanks Tara for the introduction. I'm Kamini. I'm the Gender Research and Policy Manager at Business in the Community. And to start, I just wanted to give you a bit of a background on Business in the Community and what we do. So we exist to build healthy communities and responsible businesses at their heart. So all organizations can become inclusive employers, and we're here to support you on that journey. We were formed in 1982, and we're the largest responsible business network in the UK, with over 35 years of experience working with organizations to improve their diversity. So we believe that people who feel included at work are more innovative, energized, and engaged, and we want to partner with you to share how you can leverage your inclusion strategy to increase employee engagement, drive performance, and attract valuable talent. We use our responsible business map to guide members on a journey of continuous improvement, offering specialist resources and our intersectional expertise across age, gender, race, and well-being. We drive and celebrate best practice by convening, sharing, learning, and recognizing great performance across our influential network. So that's just a little bit about BITC. There'll be a bit more information about us later as well.
Thank you, Kamini. And I'd just like to give you a little introduction to the Government Equalities Office. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we managed the introduction of the groundbreaking gender pay gap legislation in 2018, and the gender pay gap work is one part really of our wider equalities work, which looks at tackling gender inequality in society and also in work, improving outcomes for LGBT people, and ensuring a robust qualities framework for the UK. We're very fortunate to be led by the Minister for Women and Equalities, Penny Mordaunt, as well as Barness Williams and Victoria Atkins MP, three women who are really incredibly passionate about this agenda. Again, just to recap on gender pay versus unequal pay, I suppose it's important to make this point, and you'll have heard me talk about this before. What is the gender pay gap? It's not equal pay. It has been illegal. It's illegal and has been for a long time, for 45 years, to pay an individual different amounts for doing the same job or equivalent work. So that's equal pay. The gender pay gap is the difference between the average earnings of men and women, and that's expressed in relation to men's earnings. So for example, if a company has a gender pay gap of 15%, it means that women earn 15% less on average than men per hour in that company. Okay. So what's next for GPG reporting? And I'm aware we're coming up to the next deadline for reporting. I mean, it is still illegal and will continue to be a legal requirement for companies with 250 or more employees to report every year. But setting an action plan with aspirational targets will have business benefits, and we'll talk about those targets through the webinar today. But really what government want is employers to show that they're making progress and implementing action to reduce and close the gender pay gap. The What Works guidance is available on our website. And we will be releasing What Works 2.0 in 2019 also, as we grow the evidence base around actions that can help reduce the gender pay gap. So we're going to launch a little poll here. really to find out what initiatives you have in place already within your business to recruit women.
So the question that we have on screen are what initiatives do your businesses have in place to recruit women? And you'll have about 20 seconds to answer this, and we'll discuss the answers shortly. So this should pop up on your screens. And the options are targeted job ads, flexible working policies, de-biased recruitment processes, and returnships and supported hire. So I'll read that again. That's targeted job ads, flexible working policies, de-biased recruitment processes, returnships, and supported hire. So if you answer that quickly, we'll be discussing that shortly. So to get right into the conversation, a while ago, Business in the Community actually did a piece of research surveying more than 1,000 women and men and asked them to share their thoughts on gender pay gap reporting, and including the reasons for the pay gap, their attitudes towards employers, and how they might react to their employer's pay gap. So this research was actually done in advance to the mandatory gender pay gap reporting, but it's still quite relevant, as you can see by the statistics on your screen. So 92% of respondents would use the information of the gender pay gap if they were looking for a job and trying to decide between two employers. And over half of female respondents would favor the company with the smallest pay gap or the one that is more proactive in closing it. So essentially what we're seeing here is that the gender pay gap does matter when it comes to attracting and recruiting the best talent that's out there. There are more statistics that are quite interesting as well, and you can go on our website and see those. But just to give you a little bit more of a background, 90% think that the data should be broken down for each pay grade or job type. 87% of respondents think that mandatory gender pay gap will help to close the gender pay gap, and it will enable employers to understand and explain the causes of their own gender pay gap, especially if they publish figures broken down by grade, job type, etc. So it's important to devise strategies that are tailored to their own pay gaps and needs. The extent of the gender pay gap matters to employees. 89% of respondents would feel more negatively towards their employer if the gender pay gap was relatively large in their organization. On the contrary, if it was relatively small, 71% would feel more positively towards their employer. The publication of the gender pay gap, accompanied by a strategy to close it, will impact the organization's capacity to attract and retain talent, since it is likely to inform individuals' career choices. So maybe some of you have seen this within your organizations already, but essentially what we're seeing here is that your employees want to know what you're doing, and that's essential in order to attract the best talent that's out there.
Thank you, Kamini. Just to have a quick chat about the poll results, very, very encouraging. I think 17% of you already use targeted job ads. 86% have flexible working policies in place, which is fabulous. 15% are already doing or thinking about returnships and supported hire, and we'll talk about those programs in a little bit more detail through the presentation. And 69% of you are already working on de-biasing your recruitment processes, so that's great news. So I'm going to hand you back to Kamini, sorry, to talk about the business case for diversity and inclusion.
So most of you will already know some of these statistics, and this report, Winning the Fight for Female Talent, done by PwC, highlights some of these issues already. Tackling the gender pay gap is not just the right thing to do. Both employers and the economy as a whole will benefit from gender equality. Since employers are required by law to report their gender pay gap, taking action to close the gap proves your commitment to equality. There are many strategies for closing the gap, and that can be planned and implemented, and the gender pay gap itself might not actually close quickly. But we provide initiatives that you can use, and we'll be discussing those today in order to start to think about how you can look at the attraction and recruitment piece around this. So ensuring equal opportunities to progress and develop involves removing bias and discrimination from the decision-making process. Decisions around recruitment, promotions, pay, reward, training, opportunities should be based on merit and made through transparent and formal procedures. So that's essentially what Tara and I are going to be discussing today.
And before we get into that discussion, I guess I'd like to set some context. If you see from the graph that we have here, there isn't a sector that doesn't have a gender pay gap, but some are way worse than others, and we all know that finance, for example, falls into that category. And construction has a high gender pay gap also. Some sectors, such as the retail sector, compare favourably with other sectors, particularly the sectors that we've spoken about today or just now. And retail, so that's retail, I guess, what we think about as the high street retailers, and that's accepting the wholesale selling of motor vehicles and motorcycles. And the selling of motor vehicles and motorcycles is included in the retail sector overall gender pay gap. But if you take those out, retail has a gender pay gap of 9.1%, which is really favourable. And there's a lot of good work being done there in the sector. But if you dig down into it, within the sector, there is a gender pay gap of 5.1% for junior level customer service and support type roles, but there's a gender pay gap of 19% at managerial level. So clearly there's an issue there with women's progression. So as government, we're asking businesses to do everything within their power to attract, retain and progress women employees at the same rate as they do male employees. And there is always more work to be done to reduce the gender pay gap.
So it's important to highlight that there is actually a disconnect between what women feel and how employers are looking at the situation. So they have a very different approach to what they believe are the barriers preventing the attraction and recruitment of women. So when asked the question, what do you feel are the most significant barriers to increase levels of female experienced hires? Employers respond that there is a lack of sufficient candidate pool, whereas women think that the impact of gender stereotypes and assumptions in the recruitment process plays a much greater role. So as the PwC report says, this raises the question of whether owners of the recruitment process bring their own protective biases to the fore regarding the objectivity of attraction and selection processes they own. So on to how to enhance your recruitment process. And we're going to start off talking about diversity in recruitment targets. So we're going to talk about the different, we're going to go through these different areas and talk about the different areas involving attracting and recruiting the best talents. But I think setting targets is a common thread through all of these areas. And we're going to talk about this in the session using the old adage, what gets measured gets managed, and we'll talk about that through the next few slides. So just as a starting point, there was a recent report from Cranfield University saying that there are just 30 women in full-time executive roles at FTSE 250 firms. So that's just 6.4%. And an interesting way that we're trying to tackle these kinds of issues is through the target set by the Hampton-Alexander Review. So that target is currently at 33%, and we're working towards that, and hopefully we'll start to see an improvement in that regard. There are a number of different agencies working to support these, and there's an example of one in Australia, so that's the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, who've actually even gone as far as to create a target setting toolkit. So that's targets based on rigorous baseline data and analysis, and that, they say, is going to provide the most powerful lever for change in this kind of industry.
And just to, I guess, to talk a little bit more about setting targets, any of you who attended our last webinar, which we talked about understanding your gender pay gap, we talked a lot about interrogating your data, really to help you highlight where the problems are, and that's what's going to be of the most use, I guess, whenever you're setting your targets. So areas like, where do people work in your business, both location-wise and job role-wise within the business, and then where do women work within those areas as well. Looking at how many female applicants you have attracted historically for roles, for locations, breaking down the interview process and really analysing it, looking at does everyone have the same structured interview? Does everyone have the same opportunity, the same experience in interview? And looking at these areas really should give you an indication of where it is that you require action. And that's where then you need to set some challenging targets. And I guess to support this, or maybe as a precursor to this, to target setting, it's important to appoint a diversity manager, someone who has senior level support and will have responsibility for achieving these targets. And, in a smaller business, that could be a person who has a dual role, diversity manager and something else. But it's important that they're given enough time to understand the problem, the data, and the actions required to achieve these goals. And really this has shown, evidence shows that this is an effective action in increasing women's representation within your organisation. Why? I guess, you know, the theory is that it's because someone is accountable and will make sure that the targets are reached. And also being aware that someone is actually monitoring all your decisions that you make with regards to recruitment and selection can help encourage people to think about those decisions more broadly. And I guess to cut to an example that we have from the BBC, really one of the best ways to understand where your problem areas lie is to ask your employees if you haven't already done so. And the BBC, as some of you will know, have set a really ambitious target of eradicating the gender pay gap by 2020. And I guess as part of, so they've undertaken a complete review of the culture and progression within the organisation to support the achievement of this goal. And they carried out an employee survey. They had 800 participants and they received 5,000 ideas and comments from those participants, which is an awful lot of ideas and comments. And from that, they were able to develop 3 key priority areas. So flexible working, recruitment practices, and support for managers and hiring managers, some of which they already knew, some ideas came through were new to them, and that will probably be the case for yourself. But asking employees can provide evidence to gain senior level support and business buy-in for the areas where you feel and you believe that work needs to be carried out in. And an all-employee survey is a target in itself that will lead to much more insightful target development. So the next thing we will look at is job design. And what we mean by that is how your job roles are framed, and whether consciously or unconsciously this can cause gender bias in attracting a broader range of candidates. And I guess job design is really an important factor in hiring a more diverse workforce, and particularly in hiring women. And again, targets can be set here and your data can help. So where are the areas where you have less gender balance and why is that? And also look at the areas such as flexible working options, and build as many of these into roles as you can. So does the role have to be based in a certain location? Does it have to be office based? What technology might you be able to utilize to change this? You know, could part of the job be carried out outside of the main business hours? So any kind of admin tasks. And an example of this is in the civil service. We have core hours in which we have to present for work. However, with agreement from line managers and obviously allowing for business pressures, certain tasks can be carried outside business hours. And personally, for me, this allows me to drop off and pick up my children from school on certain days of the week, you know, which is a valuable benefit for me and something that I really treasure and appreciate. So I guess looking at job design will have wider benefits across the business as well. So not just for women, but for all employees. And it's also important then to look at the skills profile. So when you're designing your jobs, really think about, do people need sector experience, or could you provide technical training for someone with other skills and aptitudes that would fit with the role? Does the person require recent experience, or could you assist in updating skills or any kind of registrations that they might need for the right candidate with the right skills and aptitude, but perhaps they have a CV gap? And I know lots of businesses and some of you on the session today are offering returner programs or supported hire programs of various size and length and breadth. And we've got, you know, big names like Morgan Stanley and Sky, Highways England, Thames Tideway, and also local authorities such as Enfield Council are running successful returner programs. There's also a group of smaller legal firms in Scotland who have gotten together and are running a program through a third party. And there are other specialist sector programs such as the Back to Businessship program for marketing and media communications professionals. And many of these programs really do look at transferable skills and aptitudes, which helps to widen the candidate pool on offer.
So Tara discussed flexible working briefly, and Business in the Community actually did a recent piece of research called Equalities that some of you must be familiar with. And it was really interesting to see the responses when it came to flexible working. And I'll prerequisite this to say that these statistics do focus on men and women with caring responsibilities, but there are relevance. It is relevant to the wider community in general. So we know that 91% of women with caring responsibilities feel it is important to be able to work flexibly, and yet only 66% of employees with caring responsibilities feel they are able to work flexibly. So there's also a discrepancy here around implementing these things responsibly and properly to ensure that we're not just having the policies in place, but we're offering it in the right contextual culture, because that's really going to be what attracts the people that you need to do the job that you need them to do. And just to give another quick statistic, TimeWise did a recent piece of research which found that the proportion of quality jobs that are advertised with flexible working options is 11.1%, which is up from 6.2%, which was 4 years ago. But that's still incredibly low. So there's a lot more that we can do to attract individuals, men and women alike, with providing better flexible working options. And in the Equalize report, there are some brilliant examples of how organizations are doing this.
And just to, I guess, have a look at returners in a bit more detail. Sorry, we're having a bit of an issue with the slides here. Who are returners? Returners are people, usually women, but male as well, who have taken at least a year out of work to undertake care and responsibilities. And they are people who would like to return to the workplace at some point. And there's a potential returner population of 1.2 million people within the UK, and 91% of these are women. So I guess, removing the barriers for returners to return to employment has the potential to add huge value to the economy, but also add value to employers in terms of a much wider and already experienced talent pool. And I mean, we have a returners team here, a dedicated returners team here in GEO, and we know that there are barriers to both returners and employers in supporting returners to come back to work with regards to skills, knowledge, and experience. But we do have a returners toolkit that we can share with you if it's of interest, that talks about how you can support and how you can build and design a returner program. But I guess just to quickly go through the business case for returner programs and supported hires. As we've mentioned already, it provides access to a new talent pool, and a new talent pool that will come up to speed a lot more quickly than, for example, a younger or graduate talent pool. It really can promote and enhance the brand image of the organisation, both internally with employees, but also with clients and customers. It will improve your gender diversity and can help to reduce your gender pay gap. It's good for the economy, but also it helps to tackle skill shortages that are faced within certain sectors as well. And we talked about, and we will talk again about, transferable skills and being willing to offer training and support for returners to get up to speed on technical skills.
So the next section we're going to talk about is job advertising, and essentially this is about where you list your job can have an impact on the diversity of the candidates that you attract. So we're all competing for the best talent, but our efforts to make our job ads stand out from the crowd may well be the reason why we are missing out on half the talent. So we've thrown in as many go-get-'em type words into short sentences here to illustrate the point. But you can see from the example on the screen that these words are subtly coded as masculine and may deter women from actually applying for a job. And the converse applies too, so words like dependable, reliable are subtly seen as coded towards women. So this Gender Decoder app provides you with a tool to actually see how biased your job ads are, and it's brilliant. It's free to use, and it can really ensure that you're attracting the most diverse set of talent and not excluding anyone from the process just by the language that you're actually using. So we would recommend you debias your job ads. So think about things like, do you use inclusive language in job ads? Check the language using this DECODER app. Are essential skills really essential to do the job? And reference broader capability requirements. So can technical skills actually be learned? Some key questions you should be asking yourselves around recruitment are, do we use words like leading, drive, ambition? Can we change this? And this is a very easy change to make. So you can ask women to review the job ads. As we said, there's free software to determine how this actually plays out in practice. So a study commissioned by Total Jobs of over 70,000 UK job ads found that the language in senior level openings tended to be biased towards male. And the Australian company Telstra made flexibility the norm in 2015. So they wrote in their job ads that flexibility applies to every kind of role at Telstra, and saw an increase of women applying, with 1/3 of women stating that they had applied because of the statement and stance on flexibility. Now, I'm sure many of you are also big fans of Iris Bonet's What Works research, and there's a lot of great information in her book around this subject and how you can ensure that you're not being as biased as possible. So there are other examples that we could give as well. So a leading UK retailer with a gender pay gap of only 3.3%, they offer flexible working at all levels. So obviously on the shop floor, but also at all managerial levels as well. So they have many PT and job share middle managers, and only part-time flexible executive in the FTSE 100. So they have a majority of women working across all 4 quartiles, which isn't surprising given the nature of the business, but only just a majority in the top quartile. So offering that level of flexibility would mean that, as in this case in other businesses with similar gender representation, but high gender pay gaps, the top roles aren't dominated by men, which significantly skews the gender pay gap figures. And again, would your job ad attract career returners, perhaps from other industries? Very much worth looking at this to add diversity to your candidate pool. And again, look at that Harvard Business Review article on why women don't apply for jobs unless they're 100% qualified, because there are other aspects to think about, such as that women tend to only apply when they meet 100% of the criteria, whereas men apply when they only meet 60% of the criteria. So lots of things to think about how you're actually writing your job ads, and there are some great examples of best practice in this industry too.
Thanks, Kamini. And I guess just to reiterate there, it's important that you get the basics right. This is the first, I guess, the starting point, your first interaction with your candidate pool. So use inclusive language and give the salary range. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail further on. And I guess it's really important to state that the job is open to flexibility. The next thing we're going to look at now are job listings. So where you place your job ads really will have an impact on the candidate pool and the people who apply for your role. From a government perspective, from a GEO perspective, we have no hard evidence as such or yet to show that job listings will have an impact on your GPG. However, one of the effective actions that's been shown in our evidence-based guidance that will help close the gender pay gap is having more women on shortlists. And so how and where you advertise your jobs will definitely have an impact on this. And I think, many of you across sectors will find yourself competing for the same candidates, in data analysis, for example. So you probably are already looking at wider job listings. And I guess for those of you who work in sectors who have historically had problems recruiting women, advertising only in the kind of the industry trade or industry recruitment or industry headhunters, that will give you the same return as it always has. So, one thing to look at here again, and we've talked about this already, is looking at the broader skills and aptitudes required for the role. And allowing for technical skills within reason to be developed on the job, and that will help widen the candidate pool, but only then if you widen the search. So look at other sectors where employees may have the broader skills and aptitudes that you require once you've done that piece of work, and advertise the job within their industry, trade magazines, for example. And then there are job boards out there, which some of you will be familiar with, who focus on flexible working and who have a wide audience of women who professional women who want to work at all levels, really. And so companies like TimeWise, Women Returners, Capability Jane, and Mumsnet also advertise jobs and flexible working roles. And that list isn't exhaustive. There are many other job boards out there. And I guess, you know, if you do use recruiters or headhunters, it's really important that you make your expectations clear from the offset, and you know, really communicate the targets that you're aiming to achieve. And if you don't reach those targets with your headhunters or recruiters, push back until actually you do get the candidate pool that you're aiming for. So the next stage, I guess, on the recruitment process that we'll talk about are shortlists. So I guess, again, referring back to the GEO What Works guidance, it's important to set targets for your shortlists. Shortlists with only one woman on them don't increase the chances of hiring a woman for the role. So it's important that you have multiple women on your shortlist, and again, referring back to, you know, your job listings in order to make that happen. And again, interrogate your data for your starting point when you're looking at setting targets for this area. And it's really important that you ensure that new factors are communicated to everyone throughout the business, so different business units and hiring managers. So you're looking at broader aptitudes. Career breaks are fine. So people who are involved in sifting, it's important that these people are aware of these factors. And again, back to recruiters, hiring managers, headhunters, make sure that they receive the support to achieve these targets. And it's also important to benchmark yourself against your sector, and also against other companies cross-sector who are attracting top female talent. And again, it's important to make the targets time-bound to ensure delivery of the targets, really. And you know, the status quo is often easy, it's the path of least resistance, but I guess it often benefits one group of people over another. And in this case, some recruitment practices are discriminatory towards women, and these actions will help remove this. So we're going to do another short poll.
Just before that, Tara, though, I wanted to give an example of an organisation who's doing a really good job on this. So PwC have actually banned all male shortlists altogether, which I think is taking this a step further and really providing themselves with a target which is really ambitious, but pushing the boundaries on this a little bit as well. So yes, the next tool that we've got is on whether you use skills-based or competency-based, structured or unstructured interviews. So again, this poll should be open for around 20 seconds or so. It should be popping up on your screen at any moment if it hasn't already done so. And there are multiple options there. So you can select multiple answers if you're doing all of them, but it's just be really interesting to know what your organizations are doing in terms of the interview process. Which does bring us nicely onto our next subject of job interviews. And this one's quite an interesting one because there's a lot of conversations that are had around job interviews and the differences between men and women and things like that. But actually, we're here to provide you with a little bit more background and information on what this actually means in reality and in practice. So don't rely solely on the interviews as a starting point. So ask candidates to perform tasks that they would have to perform to execute the job effectively. So standardize these tasks and clearly set out scoring criteria to ensure everyone has the same experience. And I think what this effect has is that you're making sure that everyone is on the same footing and that you're not creating some sort of inherent bias in your interview process. And as with anything, structured and unstructured interviews have their pros and cons, but cultural and workplace biases play a part, and those biases are what you need to eradicate to have an impact on your gender pay gap. So they're more likely to creep up and have a negative impact in unstructured interviews. So skills-based interviews are really essential. Ask the same questions in the same order, score answers to each question and score immediately afterwards. You're not forgetting exactly what the response was. Use consistent and objective scoring criteria based on the job description, and make sure that your interview panel is diverse as well. And this can have a number of impacts. I think it's spoken about in the What Works guidance as well, so there's more information there too. And again, Iris Bonet talks about this in her What Works book. There's an interview checklist there on preparing the interview, what you should do during the interview, and what you should do after the interview. So if you're looking at ideas on how to make this as unbiased as possible, turn towards that book.
Thanks, Kamini. And I just wanted to mention an example here of a smaller company, a company called Dynamo PR. I heard them speak at an event a number of months ago. And what they've implemented with regards to recruitment practices and particularly interviews, they've implemented skills-based assessment. So, they've removed things like educational qualifications, and they're focused on aptitude and skills testing. So, for example, they will get people to write content if they're involved in writing content, if the job role is involved in writing content. And it's really testing a person's capability to do their job. And they've also looked at, within the interviews, the language that they use, so the language that they use within the job ad, but also the language that they use within the interview. For example, using working with instead of leading. And again, really structuring that interview process so that every candidate has the same question, set the same tasks in the same order, and has the same experience. And as a company, they feel it has it's had an immediate positive impact on the recruitment. And I guess they feel that then has led to more creativity, having a more diverse workforce and better ideas. And also for their brand, their customers and clients are happy and impressed, with their recruitment practices, with their aims and objectives to achieve a broader diversity across the business, and then also with the work that they're producing as well. And they've started to win more awards for their work, and also employee satisfaction and workplace rewards as well. So I guess that's an example of making changes to the recruitment process and action, and how it's working for a smaller business. I think we'll talk quickly about the poll results before we go on to the next stage. So 53% of you are already doing skills-based interviews. 86% of you are doing competency-based interviews. 83% are already practicing structured interviews, and I've just seen a typo there in structured, apologies. And 25% of you also do unstructured interviews, so that's an interesting mix, but also very encouraging.
So onto a subject which some people feel quite uncomfortable talking about still, which is money. And there are a couple of different factors here when we're bringing money into the conversation around attraction and recruitment, because it can not just be off-putting to have questions about money being asked, but it can be quite detrimental to ensuring you actually get people applying in the first place. So what we would recommend is don't ask women or men what they've earned in the past. The Young Women's Trust said that in the UK, nearly half of employers still ask this question, and actually 42% admit to not including wage details in advertising roles, which actually can also be quite off-putting to people applying for a job. This, unsurprisingly, is more common in the private sector. So if employers base their salary offers on past salary information, women are more likely to be underpaid if they have been earning below market wages, which essentially means that this also has an impact on progression. But when we're looking to attract people into the right roles, you're immediately striking somebody off if you're making it a requirement for them to give their salary details, because it plays into a number of other factors, which means that they might not even apply. And this relates to things like imposter syndrome. And what's interesting is, so Google actually excluded previous salary information from decisions on salary offers. And this, it's actually had a very tangible impact. So what we've seen is that it's led to an increase on women joining the organization and on the salaries that they receive when they join as well. So we would encourage transparency, and salary negotiation can even up pay inequalities. And what's interesting is actually the law can have an impact on this as well. So in places like New York City and California, it's actually completely banned to ask this question in the first place. So we can take initiatives as organizations and strike this off entirely.
And I think we go neatly from talking about money to I guess, the job acceptance stage, and what you can do as an employer to make this better for you know, your women talent. So again, going back to your job ad, you know, state that terms are negotiable, salary and or other benefits. And again, I guess when it comes to accepting the job, I think it's important that you, the employer, start the conversation about flexible working options and what options are available, and really have that conversation with the employee and come up with an option that works well for both of you. The other thing, I guess, we've talked about as well in past webinars is the allocation of jobs and projects, and I put here well thought out induction and job allocation, because sometimes presenteeism unconsciously can have an impact on the projects that women work on. You know, so they can be excluded from higher profile projects because they're not in the office every day. They're potentially working from home, or maybe they're not at their desk long after everyone leaves, but they're logging on again in the evening. So there is nothing really to stop them from working on the same projects as people who are full-time in the office, I guess. So really have a think about that. And examine the induction process and the job allocation process, and make sure that there's a structured skill building program in place for flexible workers and full-time workers alike. And we'll touch on this a bit more actually in our next webinar on women's progression, but it was definitely worth mentioning here. And then I guess the last little item on our graphic there is support for your hiring managers, and this is really important as well. I mean, managers are incredibly important in building, you know, the culture that you're aiming to achieve, a culture in which a diverse range of people wish to work, really. You know, they're the people who are allocating the jobs, they're carrying out the appraisals, they're dealing with employees on a daily basis. So it's really important that you gain their support for this agenda, but also in turn support them to understand the changes that you want to make and implement those changes around the recruitment process. So I think, you know, some of the points we're talking about here, so providing training on those areas, and, you know, if available, and if possible, allowing them time to work with a diversity mentor. And, you know, and that can be a very simple process. So, you know, letting them have regular time with a go-to colleague who's part of the diversity team, so they can go and ask questions or express any worries or concerns that they might have. And I guess also transparency in all areas of the recruitment process that we've talked about today is also very important, so that everyone is clear on the agenda, and clear that decisions will be looked at with regards to whether they fit with the corporate objectives. And again, then offering people the support to make decisions based on skills and aptitudes, and perhaps not cultural biases and perception, or just, you know, this is the way we've always done it. I think that's really, really important.
So I think that's it from us today. But just to give you a little bit of a background again on what business in the community can do to support you in terms of your gender pay gap. So we provide advisory support and a number of other different services. So it's tailored to you. We provide events similar to these ones, access to our comprehensive benchmark as well, and member-only gender pay gap toolkits. So those are on a number of different issues, as you can see on the screen. So if you're interested in becoming a partner of business in the community, do please get in touch with us. The email address is on the slides and will be sent out afterwards as well. And just to finish, we also currently have the Times Top 50 Employers for Women and Gender Equality Awards applications open. So they're open now. They'll be open until the 22nd of November. So you've got about 2 weeks left to apply. And it's easy and free to enter. So the email address is on screen. So do request that email address to start that application process. And by entering one of those applications, it provides the opportunity to be recognized twice. So that's both in the Times Top 50 Employers for Women and the Gender Equality Awards. So it's a great opportunity to showcase what you're doing for women and for gender equality across your organization, but also being on this list is a fantastic way of then attracting and recruiting women as well, because they know that it's then an environment which recognizes and supports them too. So you can find out more information on the website, and again, these details will be provided following on from the end of this webinar.
Thanks, Kamini. And yeah, just to confirm, we will have some links in the follow-up email, which will allow you to access more information on the Times Top 50 and on the broader work that business community do on gender and diversity. We were hoping to be able to give you the slides as a handout at the end of the session, but it hasn't worked in the way that we'd planned. Apologies, but what we will do is in the next few days, we will send you out a separate email with the slides as a PDF. But in the next 2 days, you will receive your first follow-up email, which will have links to the recording and also the links that we've mentioned to the business and the community information as well. It will also have registration links for our next 2 webinars. So if you're interested in attending those, please, I would urge you to sign up very quickly, as places go very quickly. So we've come right up to time. So unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions today, but please do, if you've submitted a question, we will come back to you on that. And if you think of any questions afterwards or when you're viewing the recording, please do get in touch. We can accept questions and respond.